Nippon Ichi Software America has finally announced Nihon Falcom's The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak, the next game to be localized for Western audiences in the Trails series, known in Japan as the Kiseki series. Trails Through Daybreak, known as Kuro no Kiseki in Japan, is a brand new story arc in the series, which also makes it a great point of entry for anybody who was curious about the games, but didn't want to have to go back to play all the previous games in the series. In its almost 2-decade history, the Trails series has only ever really had 3 great entry points: Trails of Cold Steel, Trails from Zero, and Trails in the Sky. If you wanted to experience the entire story from the very beginning, the only real entry point to Trails is Trails in the Sky. However, the majority of series sales began at Trails of Cold Steel, which is the previous arc in the series. And the protagonist of the Cold Steel arc, Reen Schwarzer, remains one of Falcom's most popular characters. Normally I like to wait closer to a game's release date to talk about it, but since I recently finished Kuro no Kiseki 2, my mind is fresh enough to talk about the first game in the series now. Since the game is already made, nothing other than quality of life options, release platforms, and localization language are going to change about the game before it releases. I personally began with Trails in the Sky way back when Xseed brought the game west, and have been steadily playing each new game in this series as they've become available in English. Even having played all the games, I often find myself visiting a wiki to refresh myself on the stories and characters from previous games before I start a new one, but doing that is completely unnecessary for this game. Having already played Trails Through Daybreak, I can confidently say that Nihon Falcom designed the game to be a great entry point to the series. The game narratively has very little to do with prior entries in the series, and only one of the main party characters has actually been referenced briefly in past games. Even saying too much about him would spoil Trails Through Daybreak more than the previous games he was previously mentioned in. The game does feature a few fan-favorite guest characters and NPCs from previous story arcs, but they've got their own things going on in Calvard that don't have much to do with prior games. If there's something important players need to know about those characters past, the game will let players know. If you've played those games, the existence of these characters and their familiar interactions will feel comfortable and maybe even nostalgic if you haven't seen them since Trails in the Sky. If you haven't played those games, they will just be really cool characters you might have in your party temporarily, meet in the story, and appreciate a little more if you do go back to play older games. Trails Through Daybreak takes place primarily in the capital city of the Republic of Calvard, Edith. The city has a very cosmopolitan urban feel, with urban technology fueling automobiles, mobile communication, motion pictures, and military applications. Aside from Edith, there are a few other really cool locations with their own vibes players will spend a significant amount of time in. Van is an older protagonist that's already in bed with all the change-making good, bad, and dangerous organizations that players were more slowly introduced to in older games. There are also a few new groups like the Marduk Company and the Central Intelligence Division. The game does a very good job of introducing all these groups to new players, along with characters that personify their ideals. Van Arkride is part of a one-man company called Arkride Solutions that takes contracts from people who can't go through ordinary legal channels for help. This brings me to a big fundamental difference between this game and the others. As a vigilante, Van is very different from the do-gooder protagonists from previous games that are restricted by the Bracer's Code or the law. That vibe is reflected well in this game. The fact that he's just one person instead of a group gives him more attention, and not all of it is good. It should also come as no surprise that while Van is a good person, he does work with the bad guys sometimes. An important theme of the game is the gray area or underworld, and Van is often referred to as an underworld fixer. While this game features your typical requests to kill powerful monsters, many of the other requests end in choices that will add points to law, chaos, or neutral alignment. High scores in these alignments can unlock neat features for combat options and different routes through parts of the game. The Trails series loves nicknaming characters in their games. Divine Blades, Sylphid, Purple Lightning, and Angel of Slaughter are just a few examples. Van is known as the Spriggan. People that don't contact him directly leave requests for him with the code 4SPG on message boards across the city. Van has his own information network and friends in very high and low places that help him out. He's even trained in and responsible for testing a difficult to use experimental weapon called the Stun Caliber, and a new 6th generation of combat orbment. As a Trails protagonist, he definitely begins the game a lot more established than many of the other game's protagonists do. He also has one of those sixth senses a lot of powerful anime characters have, and can smell trouble. Aside from the game's world setting and vibe, there's a relationship system as well. Van can see movies with his team to strengthen their bonds, gift them items, or participate in events with them at certain points in the game. Higher bonds generally confer combat bonuses to the characters involved, or very powerful accessories. The scenes don't overstay their welcome compared to other games. They just show new sides to characters or let players get to know their favorite characters more. Trails Through Daybreak has my favorite combat system in the series. Instead of being 100% turn-based, players can battle enemies in the field in real time, which makes battles move along much faster for weaker enemies. For more dangerous enemies, you can stun them in real-time action and then enter turn-based mode to deal bonus damage, get the first turn, and get the stat bonuses according to shard skills unlocked through the game's orbit system. Most mob enemies will fall quickly once you get a good grasp of the system and have your party set up efficiently with quartz. Boss battles are still done completely in turn-based command mode. The turn-based mode also has turn bonuses which can affect choices on what to do on certain turns and change the tide of battle. The turn order itself is visible on the bar and can be altered with actions. The game offers incredible customizability with its orbit systems. All characters come with a hollow core that gives bonuses to certain actions like evading, arts, or physical attacks. These hollow cores can be swapped according to changes in strategy. One of the coolest things about the hollow cores is that they talk to you like an AI helper, and they have unique voices, which is new to the series. You can also equip characters with arts drivers that determine which arts they can use in battle, with most arts drivers having a few free slots for players to choose their own arts. Arts function mostly like magic spells do from other JRPGs. All characters also have their own unique crafts, orbit array, and at least one ultimate move called an S-craft that often guides the way a player may want to set a character up with quartz. The orbit arrays in particular are extremely important for getting shard skills with very useful effects like Arc Feather and Fatal Lancer. If a character can only fit 3 quartz on their art line, it's an indication that they may not be a good choice for using offensive arts. Special elemental slots double the point bonus on the quartz placed in the slot, which also make it much easier to get certain shard skills over others. Some popular setups are evasion counter tanks, art nukes, or S-craft spammers. Some of these setups were easier to pull off in other games, but they're all viable in this game too. Some characters get really strong, boosting both physical attack and art attack stats thanks to their unique crafts. The more prominent villains in the game also have their own S-crafts to deal with too. There's a lot more depth to the combat system, but that's the big picture. I've always thought the combat in Trails games played a lot like evolved versions of Final Fantasy X's combat system, with quartz serving a similar purpose to materia in Final Fantasy VII. Position on the field in turn-based battles is important too, as enemy and ally actions have specific hitboxes. It's a very fun system that just becomes more fun as you get more quartz, arts drivers, and hollow cores by progressing in the game. The addition of real-time field battles provide an option for more swiftly dealing with weak mobs or getting an advantage to save time fighting stronger mobs. Aside from that, the game has a built-in achievement system that rewards players with useful items for accomplishing things like catching all fish, eating all foods, and fighting all enemy types at least once, among many other things. Personally, this is my favorite arc in the Trails series. I love the underworld aspects of the game, strengthened by how the 4 SPGs have options that relate to alignment. Alignment itself has enough of an effect on the game to be interesting. The changes to the combat system compared to other games is refreshing too. As a Trails veteran, it's awesome being able to work with darker sides of the series like the Ouroboros Enforcers, Heiyue, and Jaeger mercenary groups that were mostly just relegated to bad guy status in older games. I'd say the 2 biggest strengths of Trails compared to other turn-based JRPGs are its incredible world building and its characters. Trail through Daybreak is no exception to this, and even if this is the only Trails game you'll ever play, Edith and Calvard will feel very familiar to you by the end of the game. The new characters introduced to the series in this game are awesome, and the old characters, or the ones foreshadowed through novels in the older games, are great to finally see too. Most of the villains and even some of the characters Van works with in this game are really terrible people, even compared to older games. One of them is voiced by the same voice actor who voices Kazuma Kiryu from the Like a Dragon series in Japanese, and is just such a perfect fit for the guy. The story itself is super anime, with all the tropes and some fun twists typical in a good Trails game. Trails fans will feel right at home, but it's something to note for newcomers to the series who aren't into anime. Also, while the main characters are almost always available once they join, some of the best playable characters in the game are extremely limited in availability, which can turn some people off. I was personally a bit disappointed I couldn't keep my favorite character in my party past a few small sections in the game, but she became much more available in the next game, so I just consider it a tease. Some Trails games are ridiculous with the number of playable characters, considering you can usually have at most 4 in the party with maybe 6 in queue. I'd say this game manages its characters very well, and newcomers should feel comfortable with the game's pacing. The quality of the Trails series is definitely better as a whole than each individual game, but I think Trails through Daybreak is a very fun game that stands on its own well enough for new players to get into. Hopefully this video has either made you interested in the game or let you know it's just not the game for you. Just know that if you do start the series with this game, there's a good chance you may want to go back and play the older games too if you really enjoy it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.